Good morning. I want to thank you all for being here. My name is Neera, Tanden, and I'm President and CEO of the Center for American Progress. I'm really excited to welcome Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia here for the next installment of our Path Forward series. Really thrilled that he's capping off just an incredible year of speakers. We've had governors, senators, leaders from across the country talking about their vision for the future, and I'm honestly just so excited to hear from Senator Warnock for his vision and his discussion of the deep connection between the affordability crisis we're seeing, the crisis of opportunity in the country, and a spiritual crisis. And so I think this will be really just a fantastic capstone for this series this year, but that series will continue into 2026. I think everyone knows, and the senator will definitely speak to this, that there's a sense in the country that the American dream is in crisis. Today, only about 25%, 1 in 4 Americans, still believes the American dream exists, and even fewer young people believe it exists for them. We live at a time where it's almost a consensus that our children will be worse off than us. And I think what I'm so inspired by in the senator's remarks is that he understands the deep connection between that pessimism it creates, a lack of hope it creates, and the polarization we're seeing in the country. And so that means that we really need responses to that, whether it's addressing the costs that people feel or the lack of wages that they're seeing. People are feeling a crisis at both ends. And that's why these remarks this morning will be so crucial for us. So just to say a few words about Senator Warnock. I have seen him on the Capitol steps, on the Hill, outside and inside, advocating every day for working class people in this country. And given his experience, his life experience as a religious leader, he is always making the deep connection between America's promise and how it treats the most vulnerable, the people who don't have a voice in the halls of Congress, the people who don't have lobbyists. He's genuinely a voice for the voiceless. And it is a profound honor for me to welcome him to the stage. I will say at a time where we have so many leaders who are pulling us apart, who are trying to drive a sense of how we hate each other. I'm inspired to have leaders who recognize that good policy makes people's lives better. It gives them the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. It restores the belief in each other and in our future. And with that, it is my profound honor to welcome Senator Raphael Warnock to the stage.
Well, hello, everybody. You know, I'm a Baptist preacher. There's something called call and response. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Neera. It's really great to be here at the Center for American Progress. Indeed, I stand here as an example and an embodiment of that very idea, the promise of American progress. The belief that we can build a future where each generation does a little bit better than their parents. I stand here knowing that I have lived that dream. I love America because we always have a path to make this country better. Yet I and all of us are living through a time when we honestly feel that dream slipping away. And we all feel it, regardless of our politics. People on the left and the right, Democrats, Republicans, independents. Here is what we have in common, we all feel it. We may not agree on how to fix it, but we know it's real. And the stakes could not be higher because the question is whether we can build together a future worthy of our children. In my work, I always try to center our children in these conversations because regardless of whatever fancy titles I may have, my most important job is father of two precious children. They are my North Star. And long before the people of Georgia sent me to be a voice for them in the United States Senate, long before I was called to serve as senior pastor and preacher at Ebenezer Baptist, where Dr. King served, I was just a kid growing up in the housing projects of Savannah, Georgia. Number 11 out of 12 children. Clearly, my folks who were Pentecostal preachers read the scripture. Be fruitful and multiply. And there was not a lot of money in our house, but I feel like I hit the jackpot. There was a lot of love in my house, a lot of laughter, and deep faith. I learned lessons like the importance of hard work from my father and my mother. And my family and my community convinced that kid growing up in the housing projects on Cape Street that I could fly. And that's why I decided I was going to Morehouse College. I often say that I went to college on a full faith scholarship. That's when you don't have enough money for the first semester. But at 17 years old, I was so captivated by the faith and the spirit of Dr. King, who died a year before my birth, that I was going to Dr. King's alma mater no matter what. And God always has a dream bigger than the dream we've been dreaming for ourselves. I just wanted to go to Dr. King's college. I didn't know that one day I'd lead the church. But with hard work, discipline, and determination, I graduated 4 years later. I got it done. But the truth is that for all my hard work and discipline, I did not accomplish it alone. I was able to earn that degree and 3 others after it because of Pell Grants, low-interest student loans, and working a job on the side. It wasn't easy, but I had a path to progress. Also, you're looking at a Head Start baby. I know what that program does. I know what good federal public policy looks like. And then Upward Bound, another federal program, part of TRIO, put a kid in the projects on a college campus during the summer and on Saturdays for academic enrichment. And so I didn't have to wonder if I belonged in college. I was already on the campus. All good federal policy that provided for me a path to progress. But what keeps me up at night these days is the recognition that coming from where I'm from, it would be much harder for me to achieve that now than it was back then. I submit that all these federal policies which allowed a kid from public housing to go on to get 4 degrees, to build a life and to make a living, to make a contribution, were not simply government programs in the pejorative sense in which that word is thrown around these days, but rather a manifestation of the covenant we share with one another as an American people. That my children cannot truly succeed unless my neighbor's children succeed. My children are not really safe unless my neighbor's children are safe. It's the idea that in the words of Dr. King, we're tied in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality. Whatever affects one directly, he said, affects others indirectly. And so I stand this morning worried about that kid today who lives on Cape Street and all the Cape Streets across our country where everyday superheroes live hidden in plain sight. From Atlanta to Appalachia. In big cities and rural towns, the promise of American progress is slipping away. And understandably, it leads to a deep frustration and anger that bubbles up in our politics and our public life, and also in the everyday interactions between citizens. Have you flown on a plane lately? Been stuck in traffic? There's this anger just beneath the surface. There is a sense that something is wrong. Something is broken and in need of repair. Over the last 50 years, real wages for working families have been stagnant. And today, the price of everything from health care to housing to energy bills to child care is becoming more expensive. People are working harder and harder, but are seeing less and less from the work that they're putting in. Young people are wondering if they'll ever be able to afford a home. Older people are wondering if they will ever be able to retire with dignity. Those of us who live in the middle are trying to take care of our children and take care of our parents who are dealing with the blessings and the burdens of aging. Workers are seeing that they're creating wealth for others, yet they are barely able to get by, working every single day. And when you have that kind of increasing disconnect between the American promise and the lived reality of everyday people, not only is it a problem for your material well-being, I submit that it is a drag on the spirit. A gnawing feeling that things are amiss. The whole country has what I call a low-grade fever. You know, when you wake up and something just doesn't feel quite right, you can't quite put your finger on it, but you know you don't feel too good. An ache, a fogginess, and a fatigue that does not allow you to show up in your full strength to be your best self. We've all been there. But if you wake up like that every day, it takes its toll. It suggests that something deeper is wrong. And so decades of this low-grade fever, left untreated, has brought us to where we are today, a nation in crisis, a nation that has become disconnected from the values that make us who we are, a nation where we no longer see our neighbors as crucial to our own success, but as competitors in a competition for scarce resources. And these deficits in a wealthy nation and on a plentiful planet speak to a spiritual deficit that at its core is a lapse in the covenant that we have with one another. Hope is the infrastructure, it is the vaccine that protects our humanity. And when you lose hope, you get sick. You become impaired. Your vision is unclear. Suddenly, using your tax dollars towards some program to help some kid you'll never meet doesn't feel like a priority when you're struggling to set your own children up for success. If people can't believe in the promise of opportunity, they may choose to put their faith in strong men, who make false promises and provide targets for our anger. People who have no vision, traffic, and division. They do not know how to lead us, and so they're trying to divide us. This is how President Trump is able to take health care away from 15 million Americans and double the health care premiums of some 22 million Americans while calling it waste, fraud, and abuse. The question we ought to ask ourselves is, what is he saying about those Americans? Are our neighbors waste? Meanwhile, we are witnessing the largest transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top. We saw it in one fell swoop. Immigration raids near schools and churches. We see armed and masked federal agents and members of the military patrolling the streets of American cities, rappelling down apartment buildings in an American city, zip-tying children. Mean-spirited operations where it seems that cruelty is the point. And it's all being carried out in our name, and often in the name of religion. While some religious leaders aid and abet that claim or co-sign it by their conspicuous silence. I remind them that Dr. King is right. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. Well, my faith is not a weapon. My faith is a bridge. And I refuse to give in to those who are trying to convince us that we are at war with one another. Trumpism is a plague on the American conscience. And his ascendance to power is symptomatic of a nation that is soul weary and in the throes of a deep spiritual crisis. I did not come to this conclusion lightly. It is a conclusion that I come to as a pastor who has spent decades with people in the dim places, the dark places where they can barely see light, counseling people drowning in deep cynicism, loneliness in a hyper-connected society, despair. I've prayed with families in hospital waiting rooms as they make critical decisions around the care of their loved one while also worrying how they're going to pay the bill. As a pastor and as a senator, I've delivered aid to people who work every day but still can't pay the rent because the housing is unaffordable. This low-grade fever didn't just appear. It has been festering for decades as the American dream has felt further and further out of grasp. For too long, politicians in both parties have failed to center the people, and the cycle of despair has led us further and further into the spiritual abyss. And part of the reason, if we're honest, that we got here is that our politics has only operated in the narrowest realm of the possible. Strange thing perhaps for someone in elected office to say, but I think that the vocabulary of our politics is too puny a language for the crisis that confronts us. What can get 60 votes? What can get past corporate special interests and lobbyists? What won't hurt us in the very next election? So focused on the next election that we cannot think about the next generation. In that sense, we suffer not from a paucity of resources, but a poverty of moral imagination and moral courage. And Americans are smart. They can sniff it out. They know it when politicians are obsessed with self-preservation. They know when folks in power are more focused on themselves than the people who sent them to Washington. And that is why neither party enjoys high levels of favorability with the public. But if we center the people, our policies will finally start to address the stress that working families are feeling under the weight of structural inequities. There's a growing chasm between how hard folks are working and the lives that they're able to provide for themselves and their families. And it's led to people feeling alienated from work and in a real sense from their purpose. I believe in work. I had a hard-working dad, hard-working mom. Jobs give people a sense of dignity, a sense of pride. And people don't mind working in spite of the rhetoric we hear today, particularly as it is aimed towards the working poor. People don't mind working if they can get to share in some of the prosperity that they are creating for others. Because sharing in that prosperity gives their work meaning. We must find a way to awaken that sense of purpose in people by centering the dignity of work. But we're facing real obstacles in that goal, largely because many corporations are raking in record profits year after year, but many workers haven't seen real wage growth in decades. Folks in Washington seem to just fight for the wealthy and the well-connected as working people get dealt a bad hand time and time again. In this very moment, the president is using all the levers of government to benefit powerful corporations and his well-connected friends. If a corporation wants a tariff exemption, a patent, approval on a merger, or federal contract, they need only to bow to the president, kiss the ring, and bend to his self-serving policies. Right now we have naked, unadulterated, unabashed corruption. They're saying the quiet part out loud, no shame at all. But what if those levers of government, those immense powers, were leveraged for working families instead? What if instead of bullying powerful corporations to build himself a ballroom, the president pushed companies to pay their workers a living wage? For example, the president could ask corporations to share their record profits with their employees before they reward their shareholders in the form of a bonus or a raise. The cashiers, the line cooks, the accountants, the machinists, every worker adds value, and their pay should reflect that. That's not just about raising the minimum wage, which we absolutely must do. It's about respecting the dignity of work. People should feel pride and respected for what they do. They should share in the success of what they create. And they should be able to afford their family's basic needs with what they get paid for their work. However, we cannot be successful unless we reckon with the deeply uncomfortable truth that corporate interests have too much influence over both parties. And the voices of ordinary people are being squeezed out of the house of their own democracy. I knew this as an activist pastor. Now, as a member of the Senate, I know it more than ever. I've seen it up close. When I first got to the Senate, one of our biggest accomplishments was allowing Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices for the first time. I want you to think about that. The fact that we had to fight, that we had to pass a law in a capitalist society to get the power to negotiate with the seller, something they're trying to sell us, tells you everything you need to know about the outsized impact of corporate interests in our politics. But I'm glad we did it. But even as we did that, and I'm proud of that work, the truth is we allowed too many concessions to Big Pharma. We started with only 10 negotiated drugs in 2022, and those savings do not go into effect until 2026. 4 long years just to get started. It was a lesson for me as a new senator about the ways in which corporate lobbyists have far too much influence in our politics. Too often we have the best politicians that money can buy. And this has consequences for ordinary people. I met a young woman a few years ago that I think about often. Her name is Lacey McGee. She was putting herself through grad school to become a physical therapist, and she couldn't afford her school's health insurance. Since she had no other option, she resorted to buying insulin off Facebook Marketplace and meeting strangers in dimly lit parking lots to buy the medicine she needed to live. Georgians have told me about how they've had to get insulin from friends who had some left over from their deceased relatives. Insulin is a 100-year-old drug. The patent was sold for $1. It shouldn't be expensive in the first place. It's unacceptable. It's immoral. So I'm proud of my work to cap the cost of insulin to $35. But that struggle reveals that Big Pharma and rich insurance companies have had a veto over healthcare policy in this country, which has resulted in a broken healthcare system that's dangerously unaffordable and leaves too many families deep in medical debt. What if instead of letting rich insurance companies kill life-saving healthcare ideas like a public health insurance option, we told them to lower their prices for families or face new competition from an affordable public health care plan? And what if we also told Big Pharma that their days of bankrupting Americans with drugs developed with federal dollars are over? Some states are already finding ways to make life-saving drugs affordable. Why can't the federal government do the same? People desperately need inhalers, generics for EpiPens, cholesterol drugs, but find them too expensive to afford. Imagine if we could create good-paying jobs directly manufacturing life-saving drugs. And that's not the only way we could put folks back to work, making and building things. What if we put the awesome powers of the government towards a massive home improvement project that puts people to work? You know, when families come to me as a pastor and they've been having a difficult time and having an argument, everybody's at each other's throats and they don't remember what the argument was about. Believe it or not, here's my advice to them sometimes. I listen and then I tell them to go to the local hardware store. Find something that needs upgrading in their home. Work on the space you share together. Sometimes the cure to a good argument is some paint and plywood, some tools, where you get started on building and improving the common space that you share. And while you're focused on building something, working on something rather than working on each other, maybe you can build back some trust. While you're fixing something, maybe you can fix some of the long-term issues, or at least find the grace to work on them together. America needs a home improvement project. What if we use the power of the federal government towards building 5 million new homes for home ownership, which will finally make the dream of building generational wealth real for millions of Americans? If local governments want federal money to build roads, those roads had better lead to homes. And if they won't build, the federal government has built homes before. It could put shovels in the ground again today, building and selling homes directly to Americans at a lower cost. Increasing the housing supply does more than make monthly mortgage payments more affordable. More supplies means lower rent for renters too. And it's a way for young adults to create wealth and pave a path to a prosperous life for them and their families. We can ensure everyone feels a sense of ownership in this great American improvement project by investing in technical apprenticeships for our children, for our young people. This would do more than just solve our catastrophic housing shortage. It would make thousands of young people a part of this great American project, all while building a workforce that won't soon be replaced by AI. We can also apply the same logic to child care, to elder care, to things that machines can't do. I believe that public policy is a letter we write to our children about the kind of nation we want to be. And the path out of our spiritual crisis begins with renewing the covenant we have with one another, of celebrating the variegated beauty of our diverse humanity, of giving every child a chance, of fulfilling the promise that if you work hard, you can build a good life for yourself and your children, that a child's outcome is not based on their parents' income. None of this will be easy. Times are tough. Those who traffic in bigotry and xenophobia and division are trying to flood the zone. They are trying to weaponize despair. They are trying to wear us down. They want us to give up. We must never give up. We must never give in. Here's the thing that I know about evil. And I say this not demonizing anybody, even my political opponents, but I'm talking about the moment that we are in. Here's the thing that I know about evil. Evil always goes too far, and therefore contains within itself the seed of its own destruction. Stay in the fight. Ultimately, truth will triumph, love and justice will win if we faint not. Besides, who are we to give up? Every now and then when I feel like giving up, I think about my parishioner, John Lewis. When we think about the civil rights movement, those victories feel inevitable when in fact they were quite improbable. John Lewis had no reason to think that he could win crossing that Edmund Pettus Bridge with brute force under the color of law on the other side of that bridge, but he kept on marching. And by some stroke of grace mingled with human resilience and determination, he not only crossed the bridge, but built the bridge. And a kid growing up in public housing crossed that bridge into the United States Senate. I keep thinking about that kid and his kids, because the thing even mortal enemies have in common is we all want the best for our children, and the spiritual work we must do in this moment is to remind ourselves, not only in our public rhetoric, but through our public policy, that my children's success is tied to my neighbor's success. As I close, and nobody believes a Baptist preacher when he says as I close, I'm inspired by the memory of my late father. He was a preacher and a junk man. Monday through Fridays, he picked up old cars and lifted them onto the back of a rig, the mechanisms of which he built himself. I don't know how he did it without an engineering degree or degree in physics. And that's how he took care of his family. But on Sunday morning, the junk man became the preacher man, and the man who lifted broken cars during the week lifted broken people and told them that they were God's somebody. My dad discovered strength in the broken places of power made perfect in weakness. I'm convinced that we can lift the broken even as we climb. We can heal sick bodies, we can heal the wounds that divide us, we can heal the land. We the people can do it, but we must do it together. So don't let them wear you down. Keep the faith and keep looking up.
Thank you, Senator Warnock, for just those amazing remarks and for giving us so much to think about. I'm going to ask a few questions, and we're going to turn to the audience for questions. We have a large number of people online as well, so we'll take questions from there. I guess my first question, just also given the day that the day that we're having, there's been a rich debate around healthcare. I appreciated your remarks about what we should do going forward and how we can lower healthcare costs. But today, the U.S. Senate really does have the fate of those 22 million Americans who are on the exchanges and the Affordable Care Act in your hands. Today, they're deciding whether to extend the premium tax credits or not, but fundamentally that is about whether people's healthcare costs will skyrocket and really whether people will just give up healthcare because they can't afford it. I wonder if you just share your thoughts about the debate. It does seem to connect directly to your framework on what public policy should be about.
Sure. Well, public policy is a matter of life and death. And in no place is that clearer than when you're talking about healthcare policy. Let's make no mistake. People are going to die. I mean, that's not hyperbole. That's not drama. It's the truth. People are going to die because of the decisions that politicians are making in real time. Dr. King said that of all the injustices, inequality in healthcare is the most shocking and the most inhumane. And let me be clear. Look, the status quo is not great. You know, there are things wrong, clearly, about the status quo with our healthcare system. It's not the healthcare system any of us would build if we started from ground zero, I would hope. But they cut $1 trillion out of Medicaid, which means they put 15 million people off of their health care, which, by the way, disproportionately impacts people in red districts. I wish I could get my friends on the other side of the aisle to stand up for their own people in some of these red counties that didn't vote for me, whose hospitals are closing because they cut $1 trillion out of Medicaid. And then on top of that, after kicking 15 million people off of health care, they're now doubling the premiums for 22 million people, doubling them on average. For some, it's tripling and quadrupling. And just last night, I had to go to the floor and personally object to one of my colleagues with whom I've worked on other things for a piece of legislation that he's putting forward, which would knock another million people off of health care. So sadly, I don't expect the vote to succeed today. I think that's where we are. And we'll just have to keep fighting. I'm certainly not about to give up. I'm going to keep pushing until we get folks covered. We suffer not. You know, all of a sudden we have few resources when you're talking about ordinary people, but we have enough money to give billionaires a tax cut. So, as I said in the speech, we suffer from a poverty not of resources, but of moral imagination and moral courage. And I intend to keep making the case.
Thank you. You said in your remarks that faith is not a weapon, it's a bridge. And I think one of the things that's so deeply worrisome about our politics today is that our politics are very polarizing, but religion has become polarizing as well. It's politicized, it's used to attack. We've always had a sense of individualism and community as part of the American spirit, but we're seeing more and more that religion is used as a club. So I just love any sense of direction or thought you have about how religious leaders can meet this moment as well.
Well, I often say that I'm not a senator who used to be a pastor. I'm a pastor in the Senate. When there were folks encouraging me to run, they pointed to John Lewis, said he was the conscience of the Congress. Well, I said, well, if the Congress needs a conscience, the Senate needs a soul. So I ran for the United States Senate. Look, my faith informs my work, but in terms of values, not the creeds and the orthodoxy of my faith. I don't want to live in anybody's theocracy. Let me be clear about that as a pastor. I believe, I like this covenant that we have with one another. We're people of faith, people of moral courage who claim no particular faith tradition at all can work together to build what Dr. King called the beloved community. So that's my work. And any religion that needs an enemy constantly needs a scapegoat. That's not faith, that's insecurity. Mm-hmm. It's the opposite of faith. And it leans into tribal belonging rather than compassion and service, love of neighbor, which all of the great faith traditions say in various ways. The golden rule, there's some variation of that in all the great faith traditions. And that's what guides my work every single day. And I think Democrats make a huge mistake when we cede the space about faith and values to our Republican friends. After all, they got so much of it wrong. I mean, when I hear people mention God while transferring wealth from the bottom to the top, kicking people off of health care, going after anybody who looks like they might be from somewhere else, engaged in profiling, then I don't know who that God is. I say to some of my atheist friends who may be grounded in a deep sense of ethics sometimes. I know you're an atheist, I get it. But if we talk long enough, you might discover that the God you're imagining, the xenophobic, hateful, hurtful God, I don't believe in him either. I've got a faith that drives me into service.
Thank you so much for that. You talk about housing affordability, childcare affordability, healthcare affordability, basically driving costs down for those essentially necessary goods for people. I guess I'd ask you just a little bit more to discuss in a sense, affordability crisis. A lot of people have been talking about, or as the president likes to say, the affordability hoax. And how you think about that challenge people are seeing in making ends meet. And the role of government in these efforts. You talk about the public role in housing, a public role in negotiating drug prices, and using the power of the government. So in this affordability effort, if you want to say a little bit more about those three areas and how Georgians are really experiencing things in this moment.
Yeah, no, it's not theory for me. I return to my pulpit every Sunday morning, and it keeps me grounded, talking to ordinary people every week, and people are struggling right now. And when you can't meet your basic needs, and you're working every single day, or you can't find job security, or you can't keep the promises that all of us make to our children, that creates a kind of resentment and despair, and then there are demagogues who try to exploit that. We can do better than we're doing right now. And so I think there's a role for government, and there's a role for private enterprise. We need both of those things. And I think we just have to think creatively. The housing issue is a major issue in our country right now, and we're not going to drive the price of housing down without creating more supply. In many ways, in some ways, it's a supply problem. And there are these old covenants, one of the things, and rules and regulations and local zoning in red districts and blue that make it difficult for us to think outside of the box about housing. Meanwhile, young people can't even get in. The median age for people buying their first home is 40. So, I think either the federal government has to use its weight and its power to get local communities and municipalities to think differently and outside the box about housing, to push corporations to do the right thing, or maybe like we've done with creating drugs that heal people, we have to get in the space ourselves. The government has to get in that space, not as an exclusive agent, but as a player to try to impact the overall ecosystem. That's something government does all the time.
I'm going to turn to questions, so get your questions ready. Oh, look at that. I'm just going to ask one last question. Let me say, before we turn to the questions, that I want you should identify yourself. It should be a question. I'm a disciplined moderator, so I will push you to your question. It's great that we have so many here. I'll just ask one last question before we turn to the audience. You talked a lot about inequality, and I was really struck just the other day and remarks the President Trump made about tariffs and other things, and really talked about, which I thought just was a hallmark of the Christmas season, how maybe kids should have fewer dolls, or instead of 6 pencils, you should have 3 pencils. And I thought that was just a fascinating juxtaposition on this issue of inequality, as he's taking money from large corporations to pay for this ballroom, and the level
Getting
of
a foreign government, to upgrade Air Force One, pimp his ride.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, telling children how many dolls they need.
And I guess I just wonder about the level of shock at the inequality we're seeing. I mean, I think you're right. We don't even have a language for this kind of corruption, inequality, and just treatment, just the sort of second-class treatment we have for some Americans versus other Americans in the political moment we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the danger in this moment is that folks become spiritually numb.
Yeah.
And as they flood the zone, we kind of turn off because there's so much, you don't know how to respond to it. But we're gonna have to shake ourselves, folks. Like we can't become numb to this stuff. I mean, that's part of the game.
Yeah, their strategy.
And I can tell you, as I talk to Georgians, they're not looking to the president to give them advice on Christmas shopping. They need somebody who's going to solve the affordability crisis for them, and it's not a hoax. And all you got to do is go to your local grocery store. All you got to do is look at your utility bills. All of that is going up. And they asked the president the other day, how's the economy doing? How would you grade it? He said A+, and then he thought about it and said, on second thought, it's A+++++. Well, I want you to think about that. If he thinks that this economy is as good as it gets, you have to ask yourself, good for whom? Because he does have a reference point for that. And it's the It's the rich and the well-connected as his friends. It's not any of us.
Thank you. All right, audience questions over there. And a reminder, just identify yourself.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much. I'm Ben. I work at a lobbying firm called Invariant, and I'm on the economic policy team. So I guess I wanted to ask, in your role on the banking committee, it's clear Americans want solutions. So what are some solutions you plan on advancing that will help Americans in economic policy issues?
Yeah, I think I laid some of them out in the speech. And as a point of reference for us to begin to have discussion, I would focus on the housing issue as one of the areas I'm very focused on. I'm on banking and housing. A lot of times on that committee is all banking and very little housing. By the way, it's no small thing that we passed a housing proposal out of that committee unanimously, with Tim Scott and Elizabeth Warren as the chair and the ranking member, and it passed out of banking and housing a couple of weeks ago unanimously, and that bill is now dead. And so, and it wasn't as ambitious as I would have wanted, but it was a move in the right direction. So I'm thinking all the time about how we address the housing issue, particularly on the supply side, how we incentivize local governments and municipalities to move some of these barriers out of the way. I'm very focused on workforce development. I've got a bipartisan bill, focused on smoothing the pathway for young people out of technical and community colleges into the world of work. There are a whole range of jobs that are available that will be coming online, that will need people, but often there's a mismatch between how we're educating our kids and the workforce that we're actually going to need. So I'm very focused on that. In the aviation space, for example, I'm from Atlanta, which is it's a aerospace or aviation state with Delta Airlines and that whole ecosystem. There are plenty of jobs that we need filled with we need pilots, we need aviation mechanics, whole range of jobs. But too often we've made it difficult for kids, depending on their zip code, to get to those jobs. Aviation space does not suffer from diversity, contrary to what the president said. Remember, he used that awful, hateful language, even while bodies were on the bottom of the ice at Potomac. He said, DEI did this. Well, it is one of the least diverse sectors of our whole economy. And so I'm very focused on all of that. And I'm focused on it not, just because of my identity as a black man who grew up in public housing. I'm focused on it because I want America to win. I love this country. I want us to win, and I know we can't win unless all of our kids have a chance.
Okay. Over here. Mike is coming.
Oh, okay. Yes, so my name is Donna, and speaking as a person of one of 12 children, I'm number 7. I also am familiar with hardworking parents. My mother was Catholic, not Pentecostal though. And so I'm also a recipient of Pell Grants. So I feel the
Good to meet you, sister.
Thank you. So my question is this. Okay, so I'm going to stay positive and say that in the midterms, the Democrats are going to win back the House and the Senate. How are things going to change? We still have our president who has veto power. We still have the DOJ and all of his secretaries doing other things. How can we do anything better than just stopping what they're trying to do rather than trying to turn things around and make things better?
Well, let me begin by saying stopping certain bad things the importance of that should not be diminished. That's important work. I mean, we're getting a good sense of how bad can be. And look, there's some bad things that Congress ought to be stopping right now, but my Republican colleagues have decided to give up their power. which is strange to me. It's not easy getting elected to the Senate. You know, it's hard work. You do a lot of things to your life to do this work. And I don't know why you would do that and then give over your power to this idea of some unitary, solitary executive. And so on everything from national security and national defense, as we witness what's happening with these boats and the seizure of an oil tanker, to the nominations of people who are manifestly unfit and unqualified, to dealing with this issue of tariffs. The Congress, tariffs is clearly in the purview and the wheelhouse of Congress. It's easy to forget that right now because the president is doing what he's doing and the Republican caucus has decided to just let it happen. But we could stop this reckless and ineffective and destructive tariffs project right now. The Congress could stop it today.
Absolutely.
So, which would then help with your costs because it's a tax on ordinary people. So let's win the midterms. Let's stop a lot of negative things from happening, and let's continue to move forward in a vision that embraces us and pushes us forward to what Dr. King called the beloved community.
And just to say, if Democrats have any oversight capacity, we might discover a lot more transgressions that even maybe state AGs and others could look at as well.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go online, and then we'll go back to the audience.
So this is a question from our online audience. A recent New York Times and Siena poll had polarization and division ranked as the second issue behind the economy, with 64% saying that we are too polarized to solve basic problems in our country. What are your thoughts on the best ways to address this issue? Your role as a pastor, in addition to being a senator, gives you a foot in both places, and your perspective would be much appreciated.
So the issue of polarization, is that the question?
It's polarization is ranked as at 64% as or large majorities see it as the second most important issue after the economy.
Yeah, I could say a whole lot about that, but let me just focus on maybe one thing. A lot of it is systemic. We are right now in a race to the bottom on gerrymandering. And so let me be really clear. I think given what Texas did, Democrats have no choice. We can't disarm unilaterally, and that's not just about our party, that's really about the republic.
Yeah.
So California did the right thing, and they may have to, but this issue, there's a reason. There is a member of the Georgia congressional delegation who, in spite of her histrionics and things that she did and said, I never talk about this member of our Georgia delegation who is now retired. And the reason is, given the gerrymandering of these districts, if it weren't her, it'd be somebody else. We have very few competitive congressional districts in our country. And I think that's bad for democracy. The only thing folks are worried about is being primaried. And that's why it's difficult to move things forward, the polarization. That's why the politicians are thinking about the next election. And they're especially thinking about their primary. So we need more competitive districts. This is legislation. These are things we were trying to address in the voting bills that I was trying to move forward. And so the part of the answer to my question is that some of this is systemic. We are gerrymandered politically. We're even gerrymandered in terms of how we get our news. As people read the news that comes down their social media feed. And so we've got which has implications for these corporations and holding these big media companies accountable. There are a whole range of ways in which we've got to address this polarization. And so I speak to it as a spiritual leader, but I think there's some policy implications as well.
Absolutely. Other questions? We'll go over here. Yeah.
Oh, me. Sorry. Hello, Senator Warnock. Thank you so much for your speech earlier, being here. My name is Octavia Nettles, and as some of you may be able to see statistically, I am one of these people that are affected by our system in America, right? And my question that I have written down is really focused on some of the books that you've written. I want to know what practices, whether that's spiritual, communal, or professional, how have those been able to help you sustain your moral imagination that you mention a lot in the face of despair? And how do you believe ordinary people or people like me or anyone else in this room who may be feeling powerless, like during all of these crises, how can we begin to cultivate that imagination in our own lives and then within our own community?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for us to connect to other people. I think community means a whole lot. Obviously, I'm a pastor. I think church does something for you, whatever your community of faith is. And I'm not trying to convert anybody here today, but I think community matters. And something happens when you get separated and isolated. And we're seeing it happen with our children, with implications for their mental health, depression, rates of suicide. So I think it's important to connect the community. For me, one of my important spiritual practices is quiet time. Howard Thurman, who is a spiritual genius, is one of my leading lights, and he talked about quiet time. And so I spend a lot of time in the morning, rather than turning on the cable news. I spend some time quietly centering. That's important for me. I also think that an important practice is gratitude. People ask me what gives me hope, what am I grateful for in this moment? I am honestly grateful that I get to be in the fight. Like I could be home, wringing my hands, wondering what to do. But for me, even in the darkest moments that I have in politics and dealing with the challenges of Washington, it is for me an honor, and I am deeply grateful that I get to represent the 11 million people of Georgia, that I get to be in the conversation, that I get to be in the fight. That's what gets me up every morning. And when I take myself too seriously, I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old who set me straight.
That is a phenomenal end to this event. The senator has to get to the Hill in order to vote to protect our health care. And I just really want to say I want to express my profound gratitude to you.
Thank you.
For sharing your really thoughtful and far-reaching remarks with us here at the Center for American Progress.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.